On a road north of the Virginia, in broad daylight, Syrian's employees are victims of a shooting. The whole country is in shock. The FBI is called, but the research in the country will soon become an international hunt for men. After years of investigation, the agents hope that the risky operation they are carrying out at the other end of the globe will end up ending this pursuit. It is in Langley, Virginia, in the Washington area, that the general quarters of the CIA are located. Monday, January 25, 1993. Another week of work began for the thousands of Syrians who were returning to their workplaces. Some of them were waiting for the traffic lights to turn left towards the government agency's facilities. Most of them were alone in their car, except for a vehicle with a couple of new sailors who had met in the sea air. They thought they had a life ahead of them. The young man was hit by a shooter's projectile. Two car drivers who were behind the assailant got out of their car and saw him move forward. A third car driver accelerated before he had time to fire. Two other car drivers then lit the red light while their car was being shot. The shooter then fires on a 61-year-old man with 2 rounds of bullet holes. Looking back, he realized that the first man he had shot was still alive. He aimed at him again. He killed him, but he spared his wife. He was only a CIA employee. This 66-year-old man, paralyzed by fear, was instantly killed with 2 bullets. To the Fairfax County Emergency Services have received dozens of calls. All units were sent to the scene. The first thing we did was make sure that the scene of the crime was no longer dangerous. We didn't know what type of individuals we had to deal with. We set up a normal security around the crime scene to protect ourselves from another attack. The authorities then watched over every sector in a radius of 5 km, and they cut off access to motorists on Route 123. On the scene of the crime, the police found 2 bodies and 3 people seriously injured. 4 other people, including 3 women, were shot dead. Special Agent Brad Garrett arrived a few moments after the shooting. The first thing you do when you arrive on the crime scene is to see what the whole thing is about. In this case, we were obviously caught at the CIA. We could have wanted the victim, but it was more likely that the shooter wanted to make a public gesture, especially that he had acted in the middle of the traffic. We quickly drove the victims to the nearest hospitals. During this time, the investigators questioned the survivors. It was necessary to quickly transmit the description of the fugitive and his vehicle to the local authorities. Unfortunately, the witnesses had no time to notice anything, and their deposition differed from one another. The witnesses stated that the suspect was a man with a Byzantine complexion and that he was armed with a rifle. That was pretty much all we could use to make his portrait stand out. The descriptions of his size varied. As for his vehicle, it was, according to the testimonies, a brown van or a blue van. I think many witnesses were in such a state of panic that they were trying to protect themselves from being victims. A woman saw the suspect better than the others. According to her, the shooter was a man with dark hair, in his 30s, and wearing a light brown jacket and dark pants. Although she was in his field of vision, he had chosen not to shoot at her. We looked at the individual's profile to see if there was a link between them. Had they done something in the past that would have caused them to take revenge on them, both personally and professionally? The crime scene measured 50 square meters. Green. Splashes and muds are on the road. The judges had to take note of all these details before removing the bodies of the 2 victims of their car, as witnessed by Detective Jeff Miller from Fairfax County. I have a duty to them. I do something for their voice. They've been murdered. There's this person who's a silent friend, and somebody has to speak up for them. And so, that's the way I perceive my work. I'm their voice. And it's my job to find whatever it is and help us find the person responsible for these crimes. The technicians collect 10 projectile shells. It was probably a AK-47 rifle. A little behind the cars, where the shooter had started to fire, the experts also collected a projectile. This indicated to the investigators that the weapon used was semi-automatic and that it had been wired before that was able to shoot the first projectile. By analyzing the location of the shells compared to the green splashes, the team was able to draw the trajectory of the projectiles and know in what order they had been shot. The investigators also collect ice samples from all vehicles. Maybe the combination of several types of glass in the same place could become a significant clue. There were a number of different cars, German, American, and Swedish. The glass composition of these cars was not the same. If some of the glass, even microscopic, could have hit the shooter, it could be very misleading for a suspect to find these 3 different types of glass on his clothes. While the technicians were following the scene of the crime, agents and detectives went to the hospitals to talk to the survivors of the attack. The young woman who had lost her husband had healed the time to see something since she had been hidden under the board almost all the time. She declared that the man could have set fire to her at any moment, but that he had turned away and that he had left as he had done to the other woman who had survived. At the command post of Fairfax County, the woman who had seen the shooter best worked with a judicial officer. Based on his description, investigators were of the opinion that the shooter was of Hispanic or Middle Eastern origin. The woman had not had time to examine the car of the murderer, but she remembered that it was a family car. The investigators broadcast the portrait to the public. One of the first things we had to do was to provide a telephone number. If someone had attended the stage this morning, we wanted them to contact us. And to do that, we had to establish a telephone number and give the number to the media as quickly as possible. The calls did not take long to come in. Meanwhile, the agents and the police were still looking for the mobile of this murder. If they discovered what had pushed the murderer to such an act, they would thus reduce the list of potential suspects. The agents examined the victim's past in order to find out why they had been targeted. Once we started looking at the circumstances of the incident as to why the victims were shot, it appeared to me that there was no link between them and the person or persons that shot them. Just 8 hours after the shooting, the detective Jeff Miller from Fairfax examined the dowgies found on the crime scene's ground. He could confirm that these were dowgies of an AK-47 assault rifle, a weapon mainly used by Russian and Chinese armies. After a more careful examination, he discovered a fingerprint on one of them. The difficult part about this situation is the cylindrical shape of the case. The fingerprint covered about 80% of the circumference. It was almost all the way around this cartridge case. So what I had to do was photograph it in several steps. I took a photo and then turned it a few millimeters. I adjusted the lighting so it would be identical to the previous photo, and I took another photo. I repeated this process until the back was photographed on all its circumference. This tedious procedure allowed us to obtain a complete digital footprint. This was the first solid lead for the investigators. The footprint was introduced in a system linked to 185 databases all over North America. We took that one latent fingerprint and sent it to any of our data sources in North America and asked them to search their data, but we then asked them to see if that fingerprint was online or if it was within any of their automated systems. Despite important research, we find nothing. This meant that the suspect had no criminal record or had never committed crimes in North America. The next morning, the police started looking for witnesses among the motorists who were using the 123 road and who could have seen something abnormal in the morning of the shooting. The police are distributing the suspect's portrait to 3,000 motorists. The media coverage allowed us to get testimonies from all over the United States. Even if none of these testimonies stood out to others, they were all kept in the database of the command post that never ceased to grow. During the whole evening, patrols on the roads north of Virginia and near Washington were on alert. That evening, a car in the description corresponding to the suspect was stopped by a Virginian patrolman. This one asked for reinforcements before approaching the vehicle. He didn't know if it was the shooter or if it was the case, if he was still armed with his AK-47. On January 26, 1993, 36 hours had passed since a shooter had opened fire with AK-47 assault rifle in front of the CIA offices and killed 2 people, addition to having injured 3 others. A Virginia Highway Patrol car stopped at a vehicle whose description corresponded to that of the suspect's car. Witnesses had said that the suspect had dyed his hair and dark hair and that he was of average stature. Although the man arrested by the patrolman corresponds to this description, his fingerprints differ from those of the fugitive. Tens of CIA, ATF, and FBI agents joined Detective Fred Fee from Fairfax County to find the shooter. As additional manpower was needed, we were given the support we needed. The FBI was very generous in this regard. They not only provided us with the latest technology, computers, and so forth, but they also assigned us with office employees who were able to manage the system we had set up to process the leads that we were receiving from the public. But Agent Brad Garrett was still very worried. Despite the fact that we found a fingerprint on the crime scene, we had not yet identified the height of the gun, and we did not know his mobile. All we knew was that the shooter had used an AK-47 rifle. So I made this decision. I said, let's go back to the back, and let's stop all the AK-47s that were purchased in the previous year. Typically, people who commit these kinds of acts buy their weapons a short time before they get the act. Over the next few days, ATF agents visited Virginia's Armory and Maryland's, with the exception of Washington, given that the purchase or possession of firearms is prohibited in the capital. The agents discovered that we had sold 1,000 AK-47s in the north of Virginia during the year. We sold 600 at Maryland. The agents collected the receipts of each of these sales. They then entered the names of the owners in their database. On February 1, a week after the shooting, investigators hoped that their ongoing database would allow them to establish a link between the thousands of names and police reports that were found. We set new parameters to compare the characteristics of the suspect to the individual who bought an AK-47. The system then provided a name, the one of Mr. Mir-Em Khanzi, 28 years old. He had acquired an AK-47 3 days before the shooting. This Pakistani immigrant lived in Herndon, Virginia, and his roommate had reported his disappearance 3 days after the murder. The investigators are looking for a team of agents to investigate Mir-Em Khanzi. This one had not returned home, but his roommate, who had reported his disappearance, worked at the international airport in Olos. He was also of Pakistani origin. He was hired by a security company to operate a magnetometer, this device that checks if passengers carry weapons on them. He declared to the FBI that he had not seen Khanzi for several days. He added that he couldn't talk to the agents for long because he was on duty, but that he could meet them later at his place in Herndon and that he would then answer all their questions. But when the investigators went back to his place, he wasn't there. He discovered that he had advanced his travel plans. A lot of the things he had told the agent and the detective on Sunday were false. He had told the owner of his apartment that he was leaving on Tuesday, not on Thursday as initially planned. He had changed his ticket to leave for Pakistan on the same Tuesday. In fact, he had no chance of leaving the country more rapidly. He didn't even stay 24 hours before the flight of the staff. The agents watched the apartment, hoping to see him or Khanzi arrive. His work is fruitful. He finds the collocator alone at home. The apartment was practically empty. Mine was in the bedroom? No problem. Apparently, Khanzi and his roommate did not intend to return to the United States. The roommate declared that he did not know where Khanzi was, but he allowed investigators to search the apartment, almost empty. In the room, the agents found in a suitcase 2 automatic guns, a Beretta and a Makarov, ammunition for AK-47 rifle, and a bulletproof vest. About 10 years. The host declared that he had ignored the existence of these weapons and added that it was Khanzi's suitcase. The investigators continued to investigate. Under a sofa, wrapped in plastic, they found another firearm. It was an AK-47, the same type of weapon as the one used to kill 2 people and hurt 3 others in front of the Syrian social seat. The roommate told us that he had met Khanzi by the intermission of our Pakistani man. Khanzi was looking for a place to live, and the roommate offered him to come live with him. He had then agreed on the amount that Khanzi had to give him to live with him. In the hope of no longer being the subject of the investigators' suspicions, the reporter signed a document in which he agreed to collaborate with them in the framework of the investigation. In a closet, the agents discovered a bright jacket like the one the shooter was wearing. The owner said she belonged to Khanzi. In front of the apartment, he shows them where the Khanzi vehicle was parked. A pickup. The police found that he was well registered in the name of the suspect. Inside was a map, which was unfolded to indicate where the CIA offices were in English. Next to it, they noticed a newspaper cut with an article about the CIA director. The agents should get a mandate to search the vehicle. If it was this truck that had been used during the shooting, it did not correspond to the description of the witnesses. At the police station, the investigators continued their interrogation of Khanzi's roommate. He declared that Khanzi had been working for a messaging service since August 1992. 6 months earlier, in February, Khanzi had obtained political asylum and a work permit from the Immigration Service. We were fortunate in this case that we had the digital prints of Khanzi. Not because he had a court record in the United States, but because the Immigration Service had asked him to give them to him when he had asked for asylum. We were able to get the paper containing his fingerprints from the Immigration Service. We asked experts in dactyloscopy to examine the index during the following night while investigators were pursuing their interrogation of the witness. According to him, Khanzi was a rather taciturn man. But when he listened to the news and saw how Muslims were treated during the Bosnian conflicts in Iraq and Israel, it was in those moments that he swore to go to the act. The roommate ended up saying that Khanzi had told him that he was going to do something impressive. And when we asked him to tell us what he heard there, he said that he was not sure, but that it could be a shooting. Khanzi told him that he would do something important at the CIA office, the White House, or the Israeli embassy. Even if the agents thought that the locator was not involved in the shooting, they forbade him from leaving the country until the investigation was over. The lab experts compared the print on the crime scene's projection sheet to that of Khanzi on the Immigration Service sheet. They were identical. It was also confirmed that the serial number of the weapon found in the apartment was the same as that of the AK-47 assault rifle manufactured in China, and that Khanzi had bought 3 days before the shooting. Of the CIA, Khanzi had presented 2 identity pieces so that the police could verify his previous. The firearms examiner was able to say that the bullets had been fired from the crime scene with the gun found at the Khanzi apartment. He was also able to examine the case. The technicians then examined the jacket found in the Khanzi's closet. If it was the jacket described by the witnesses of the shooting, we would find glass shards embedded in the fabric. You had glass from a German car, a Swedish car, an American car. If you had all those glass on his clothes or shoes, it would be obvious that if he was not the author of the crime, he was necessarily on the scene, so that you could find all those samples of glass on him. The technicians managed to find glass particles on these clothes, which corresponded to the glass of all the cars on the crime scene. Investigators now have enough evidence to accuse Mr. Mir-Em Khanzi of first-degree murder and of having injured other people with the intention of killing them. The FBI also accused him of escape crimes to avoid justice. The sum of $100,000 would be provided to anyone who provided information leading to the capture of Khanzi. The agencies then dispersed to question members of the Pakistani community in the Washington region. They were looking for friends of Khanzi, acquaintances, or anyone who had been in contact with him. We learned that Khanzi had gone to a market in Herndon. The owner of this market knew the manager of a travel agency. When we were asked about this, the manager told us that Khanzi had come to see him on the afternoon of the 25th, or the day of the shooting, and that he had bought a one-way ticket to Pakistan. 2 weeks after a shooting in front of the offices of the Syrian, a human-based hunt on the planet was about to begin. The investigation would be opened a few 13,000 km from the crime scene in Pakistan. In February 1993, the Pakistani Mir-Em Khanzi, 32, was searched by the FBI for the murder of 2 CIA employees and for having injured 3 other people on the road in front of the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. 2 weeks after the shooting, the agents learned that Khanzi was on board a plane leaving for Quetta in Pakistan on January 25th, and that he had only bought a ticket to Les Simples. Quetta is less than 130 km from the Afghan border. Now, the fugitive could be anywhere. To start his research at the other end of the globe presented major problems for FBI Special Agent Brad Garrett. One of the difficulties in all these overseas cases is that, first of all, you have no jurisdiction to begin with. You're just another American citizen in a foreign country. So the key to finding a fugitive is to deal with the intelligence service through informants. The FBI turned to the special agent and supervisor Gregory Lee from the American Agency for Drug Struggle, the DEA. As Pakistan was a major heroin and hashish center, the DEA had many reliable contacts and informants for about 10 years. At the time of this investigation, Agent Lee was in charge of the DEA office in Karachi, Pakistan. Well, the working environment there was completely different from what an FBI agent is used to in the United States. It's like you're really in a completely foreign place where everything is new. The language, the infrastructure, how it worked, who you met. We could provide him with the protection, weapons, and everything he needed to conduct his investigation. In this country, of 135 million inhabitants, unstable at the political level, and where corruption had reached public service, the FBI would need all the help available. Agent Garrett also realized that Khanzi would find many people who would like his cause in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the neighboring country. He would be respected in Afghanistan. In fact, he was already respected in Pakistan. The CIA in particular, just like the American government in general, is not well liked in any of those countries. As a result, people refused to tell us anything about Khanzi because they thought what he did was heroic, as some people told us. In March 1993, the U.S. Foreign Affairs Ministry declared that the CIA attack had been a terrorist act and offered $2 million in reward to anyone who provided information leading to the capture of Khanzi. Once the logistics were established, Agent Garrett took the plane to Karachi, Pakistan, for a flight of 21 hours. As soon as he arrived, DEA agents had set up a meeting with the informant. They distributed brooches and light boxes with a photo of Khanzi, also giving away the $2 million reward in English, Arabic, and Punjabi. Their word caused reactions from as far as Thailand and England. Pakistan's informants said that Khanzi was hiding in Afghan villages and tribes near the border. Khan's family was originally from Afghanistan. And keep in mind that Khan's family came from Quetta, Pakistan, a city less than 130 kilometers from Afghanistan. So there was a natural link between Khan's family, Quetta, and Afghanistan. The agents went back to the Khanzi family house in Quetta, where they questioned all of their brothers, rich landowners. They declared that Khanzi was welcome in January, a few days after the shooting in Virginia. He arrived without telling anyone and had only a small suitcase with him. It was rather strange given the length of the trip. The Khanzi brothers also found it strange that this one did not wear a coat because it was during the coldest period of the year. Khanzi had only stayed for a few days. Then he left as soon as he arrived. He had told no one where he was going, and his brothers had no news of him since. A few weeks later, they had learned from the CNN channel that Khanzi was wanted for a terrorist act. The agents thought it was likely that Khanzi was hiding in Afghanistan, just on the other side of the border. We knew then that it would be safer in Afghanistan, and particularly at that time, because this country was controlled by several tribes. There was then practically no central government in this country. We didn't even have to ask permission to go there. The investigation then hit a wall. The agents returned to the United States. The Khanzi case did not progress over the next 3 years. It was then that the Foreign Affairs Ministry increased the reward to $3.5 million. Agent Garrett hoped that this generous reward would attract an informant. He worked with FBI expert in dactyloscopy in Washington. It had taken a long time since the attack, and Garrett wanted to know how to recognize the fingerprints of Khanzi if the suspect had ever been arrested in an isolated area. The study was very characteristic of the fingerprints of the Quincy Diedowitz that he had provided to the Immigration Service a few years earlier. The experts also showed Agent Garrett how to take the footprints of a suspect rebel on the ground. I had to devote to this case the clearest of my energies for a long time. I think I was afraid I could never capture him. And this fear was well-founded. In April 1997, after 4 years in Khanzi, an FBI agent posted to the U.S. consulate in Karachi, Pakistan, received a call from one of its most reliable sources. The man claimed he knew where Khanzi was hiding, but he refused to tell the phone. He asked the agent to wait for him in a public place and told him that another man would call him on his mobile phone an hour later. The streets of Karachi provided excellent coverage for the informant. But if he was seen talking to an American agent by people with bad intentions, it could cost him his life. The agent waited for the call at the planned location. He hoped that the informant would provide him with valuable information that would allow him to put the pin on Khanzi. The informant said that not only did he know where Khanzi was, but that it would be possible for him to attract her to a hotel at a precise time so that she could proceed to her arrest. The informant represented a group in charge of protecting Khanzi who had not been able to resist the promise of the generous reward. The American government was following this case closely. The White House approved the secret plan for the arrest. The Secretary of State then obtained permission from the leader of Pakistan to let the American agents carry out this delicate operation. The Pakistanis are very sensitive about their image. They are very proud people. They didn't like one of their compatriots to be identified as an international terrorist. That someone could travel from the other side of the world to Washington with the intention to kill CIA employees, that would be an embarrassment. The agents arrived in Pakistan with a specialized team in special operations trained by FBI agents in Quantico, Virginia. They had to bring Khanzi back from a hotel in a desert city in the northern part of Pakistan, where the informant promised them to shoot her. After analyzing the hotel's plan, each member of the team decided to sign a task. The agent settled in a room in front of the hotel. He could not verify if Khanzi was really there. He had to fully trust the informant. According to this same informant, the Khanzi's room was on a higher floor. Based on the plan of the building, the agents had planned to block all the hall exits and the stairs before erupting in the Khanzi's room. The informant told him that the hotel door was never locked and that there were no security guards. With this information, we came up with a plan of arrest. We knew how we would enter the room, who would watch the entrance hall, and what we would do once in the room. It was extremely important. When you put on a scenario like that, everyone needs to know exactly what they have to do. After closing the hall and the stairs, a disguised agent would pull the rocket out of his room, telling him that it was time to pray. The agents put on their bulletproof vests and checked their weapons. To hide his weapons, he redressed traditional clothes from Pakistan. On 15 June 1997, the plan to arrest Mir-Em Khanzi went to waste. The team arrived at 4 a.m. because at 7 a.m. they thought there would be less passers-by. But when the men tried to enter the hotel, they found the door closed. We couldn't get in. We were there. 4 Americans wearing Pakistani clothes at 4 or 5 in the morning in front of the hotel. Clearly, the anxiety was at its highest point, given the situation. It was almost like all of this was surreal. To make the situation even worse, the street was full of people who had only noticed these Americans dressed. We didn't realize that it could be really hot in this city. So people started working around 3 or 4 in the morning. There were so many people everywhere. We didn't expect that. The informant was wrong about the hotel's door. After 4.5 years hunting down Khanzi, the FBI was still fighting. On 15 June 1997, a FBI arrest team, wearing traditional Pakistani clothing, tried to enter a hotel in the central north of Pakistan, where the alleged terrorist Mir-Em Khanzi was hiding. But according to FBI agent Brad Garrett, their informant had mistakenly induced them. We were told that the hotel door would not be locked and that there would be no security guards. But when we arrived, the door was locked, and a few minutes later, we saw that there was a security guard there. The agents signaled the guard to open the door, and they entered the hotel. The team took position in the hall, while some agents quickly climbed up the stairs. They hoped that the informant had not been wrong by giving them the number of the room in Khanzi and by saying that the fugitive was there. When all the members of the team took position, the agent who knew how to cover knocked on the door to announce the start of the prayer, hoping that the occupant would leave his room. If Khanzi was there, he could be armed. The agents were getting ready for the worst. As soon as the door opened, the agents erupted into the room. The man tried to escape and started screaming. Had to shoot him to make sure he wouldn't wake up the other occupants. After he calmed down a bit, I told him, "I'm going to take the ball away if you promise not to yell anymore." He said yes. Yes. I took the ball away and asked him his name. He said he was a bit of a wimp. He didn't look like the picture we had of the suspect. He was bigger. I told him I wasn't sure he was the man we were looking for. The agent hoped that the fingerprints of the man he had just captured would correspond to those that Khanzi had provided to the U.S. Immigration Service 6 years earlier. He applied ink to the man's thumb and compared the fingerprint obtained to that of Khanzi's thumb. The 2 footprints were identical. After more than 4.5 years and a 13,000 km journey, the FBI had finally put the hands on the collar of the alleged terrorist, Mir-Em Khanzi. But the mission was not yet finished. Not only should we arrest Khanzi, but we also had to get him out of the hotel without a shadow and finally leave Pakistan. The special agent and supervisor Gregory Lee from DEA brought his logistic support to the FBI. "You've got a guy in custody now, and you've got 4 men. You're about 8,000 miles from here. You're up. In a desert like Death Valley, that would be Death Valley. And we had to bring this Pakistani back to the United States. The fact that Americans are holding a Pakistani captive in their own country was dangerous." The agents took the fugitive to a helicopter, where they flew to Islamabad, where they obtained the permission to extradite the suspect as early as the next day. The FBI headquarters in Washington were informed of the success of the mission by the following code: "The package has been delivered." The arrest team brought Khanzi back to the United States aboard a military plane to avoid landing in a foreign country. They refueled during the flight thus. Khanzi could not apply for political asylum before going to court in the United States during the flight of 21 hours. Khanzi admitted that he had stayed in Afghanistan for almost 4.5 years. He also admitted that he was responsible for the shooting in front of the offices of the CIA. He had decided to kill employees before he entered the well-protected premises of the agency to express his discontent towards the CIA and the United States. He added that he had not killed women because the Islamic law forbade him. After the shooting, he was surprised to see that he was still alive. He had then gone to a park. Then he had eaten before buying a plane ticket for Pakistan. We asked him why he had stopped shooting when he still had a lot of ammunition with him, according to his own sayings, and that he had left so many others in his apartment. And he said that it was because he had missed a target. Assuming that he had given his deposition in full freedom, Khanzi signed his oaths. After arriving in the United States, a helicopter carried him to a safe place. The agents did not neglect any security measures to put Khanzi back in the hands of the Fairfax police, where he faced homicides, blows, and injuries. Detective Jeff Miller never forgot that day. By capturing him and repatriating him to the United States, we showed to the rest of the world that our country, just like the FBI and the CIA, can't let something so serious happen without doing anything. No matter how long it takes, no matter where these people hide, the United States is going to do the very best to track these criminal dams and bring them back to justice. Khanzi was found guilty of murder, of having made fire with the intention of killing, and of having used a firearm with the intention of committing crimes. He was sentenced to death. He was executed in 2002. Following the shooting, a monument was erected in memory of the victims of Route 123 at the very place where they fell after being shot down by the shooter. The CIA has re-stirred the security measures at the English Social and all its offices around the world. This successful investigation has added to the long series of battles against terrorism.